They thought they could enslave the entire galaxy, destroying any species that dared oppose them, until the day they fucked with the wrong humans. Captain Douglas Johnson's eyes snapped open as he took a gasping breath. His cryopod hissed, cold mist spilling out as the lid lifted. Around him, the darkened cryo chamber hummed to life. Dim lights flickered on, revealing rows upon rows of pods. One by one they opened, his battle-hardened marines emerging from their icy slumber. Douglas sat up, his muscles aching from the long cryo-sleep. He glanced at the display on his pod. 52 years, 7 months, 18 days. That's how long they'd been under, drifting through space, waiting for their chance at vengeance. "Attention all personnel," the ship's AI announced over the intercom, her voice crisp and efficient. "We have arrived at the Eliani homeworld. Prepare for potential hostile engagement." The memories flooded back, as vivid as the day they happened. The surprise attack, the Eliani warships appearing in Earth's skies without warning. The bombardment, the cities turned to rubble, the millions slaughtered. Emperor Rigel's declaration that humanity was a threat to galactic peace, too advanced, too expansive. They'd barely escaped, the remnants of humanity fleeing aboard massive evacuation ships. But the Eliani pursued, relentless, merciless. They hunted down the human ships one by one, destroying them utterly. The UES Retribution was all that remained, the last bastion of the human race. Low on fuel and supplies, Captain Vasquez had made the call. The crew would enter cryosleep, biding their time until the Eliani lost interest. But the humans never forgot, and they never forgave. In the virtual training simulations, they'd honed their skills and tactics, preparing for the day they'd face the Eliani again. And now that day had come. Douglas stood, his powered armor humming to life as he activated it. He grabbed his rifle from the rack, checking the charge. Around him, his marines did the same, their faces grim and determined. He strode to the nearest viewport, gazing out at the Eliani homeworld below. It was a planet of gleaming silver towers reaching towards the stars. For 50 years, the Eliani had terrorized the galaxy from this very place, conquering and enslaving. They thought themselves invincible. But they'd made one fatal mistake. They'd left a few humans alive. Alarms blared through the ship, red lights flashing. "Eliani warships approaching," the AI warned. "They are ordering us to surrender or be destroyed." Douglas felt a cold grin spread across his face. He glanced back at his marines, seeing the same eager anticipation in their eyes. It was time to show the galaxy what happened when you fucked with humanity. The massive hangar bay doors of the Retribution slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Beyond the shimmering containment field, a swarm of Eliani fighters screamed towards the human ship, their plasma cannons blazing with searing blue light. "Let's roll out," Douglas shouted, sprinting towards the waiting Ravens with his fellow Marines close behind. They leapt into the heavily armed dropships, strapping into the crash seats as the ship's engines roared to life. The Ravens shot out of the hangar bay, the fastest and deadliest craft in the human arsenal. Douglas gripped the controls of the lead ship, call sign Archangel. His eyes narrowed as he wove through the storm of plasma fire. The dropship's advanced stealth coatings rendered them nearly invisible to the Eliani sensors, the black hulls shimmering like mirages against the starfield. Douglas brought Archangel around in a tight arc, aligning the targeting reticle on his HUD with an Eliani fighter. With a cold smile, he squeezed the trigger. The Raven's main cannon, a high-velocity railgun, thundered. The hypersonic projectile ripped through the Eliani ship, tearing it apart like tissue paper. It pinwheeled away, trailing fire and debris. The other Ravens followed suit, their railguns roaring as they tore through the Eliani fighter screen. The alien ships burst apart under the onslaught, the Ravens moving among them like wolves culling a herd of sheep. But the Eliani had a nasty surprise waiting. A massive warship, easily 10 times the size of the Retribution, shimmered into view behind the human ship. It was an Eliani dreadnought, a behemoth designed for planetary assault and orbital bombardment. The dreadnought opened fire, a barrage of antimatter missiles streaking from its launch bays. They hammered into the Retribution's shields, the impacts rocking the ship. Inside Archangel's cockpit, warning lights flashed red as Douglas watched the Retribution's shield strength plummet on his display. He gritted his teeth, knowing that once those shields failed, the Retribution would be torn apart. The Retribution's captain came over the comm, his voice strained. "All hands abandon ship. Get to the escape pods and make for the planet's surface." Douglas slammed his fist against the console. The Eliani would gun down the escape pods with ease. They needed a plan, and fast. An idea struck him, a memory from the desperate evacuation of Earth. He'd seen schematics of the Eliani dreadnoughts in the databanks. Douglas pulled up the schematics on his display, his eyes scanning the holographic ship for any weakness. There, a small thermal exhaust port, barely 2 meters wide, just below the main bridge. A well-placed railgun shot could trigger a chain reaction in the main reactor. Douglas switched to the Raven's squadron channel. "Listen up, I've got a plan. That dreadnought has a weak point, a thermal exhaust port. I'm going to make a run for it, try to put a shot right down the pipe. The rest of you, keep those fighters off me." The acknowledgement lights winked on his HUD as the other Ravens peeled off, drawing the Eliani fire. Douglas pushed Archangel's thrusters to full, the dropship leaping forward on a pillar of blue flame. He rocketed towards the looming dreadnought, weaving through the lattice of plasma bolts that filled the void around him. The dreadnought's point defense cannons swiveled to track him, stitching lines of fire across space, but Douglas jinked and rolled, always a hair's breadth ahead of the searing beams. The exhaust port grew larger in his view screen, a small thermal vent in the dreadnought's armored hide. Archangel's targeting reticle settled over it, flashing red. Douglas held his breath, his finger tightening on the trigger. At the last possible second, he fired. The railgun round streaked towards the port, a hypersonic spear of tungsten and depleted uranium. Douglas hauled back on the stick, pulling Archangel into a sharp ascent. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a brilliant flash erupted from the dreadnought's hull as the reactor went critical. A massive chain reaction tore through the ship, secondary explosions rippling along its length. The mighty warship broke apart, torn to pieces from within, debris hurtling in all directions. "Yeah," Douglas roared over the comm, a fierce grin on his face. "Take that, you Eliani bastards!" But his celebration was short-lived. His radar lit up with dozens of new contacts as more Eliani ships rose from the planet's surface. An entire armada moving to encircle the human dropships. In the distance, the Retribution drifted, its hull shattered and leaking atmosphere, flames licking from its breached compartments. They were alone now, cut off from support, facing a vastly superior force. Douglas looked at the faces of his fellow Marines on the comm screens, seeing the same realization in their eyes. The Eliani had numbers and firepower on their side, an overwhelming advantage. But the humans had something more dangerous, more potent than any weapon. They had the cold fire of vengeance burning in their hearts. They had the indomitable human spirit, forged in the crucible of 100 desperate battles. Douglas sprints towards the Eliani defensive line, plasma bolts sizzling past him as he weaves and dodges. Behind him, the surviving Raven dropships lift off, scattering in all directions to avoid the anti-aircraft fire. Explosions blossom in the sky as several of the ships are hit, spiraling out of control and slamming into the gleaming silver towers that rise above the city. Douglas grits his teeth as he sees his comrades going down in flames, but he doesn't stop. He can't stop. The mission is all that matters now. The dropships touch down in a central plaza, disgorging their human troops. Douglas hits the ground running, his powered armor whirring and clanking as he moves. Around him, the other soldiers quickly form up into squads, checking their weapons and scanning for threats. But the plaza is eerily quiet, the normally bustling streets deserted. Douglas frowns, a sense of unease prickling at the back of his neck. Something's not right here. Suddenly a piercing alarm splits the air, echoing off the towering buildings. Silver shapes start pouring out of the doorways and alleys around the plaza, but they're not Eliani soldiers. They're civilians, armed with makeshift weapons and charging towards the human position with blank, unseeing eyes. Mind control? Douglas realizes with a sickening lurch. The Eliani have turned their own people into puppets, a living shield to throw against the invaders. He barks an order over the comm, telling his troops to switch to non-lethal weapons. But it's too late. The mind-controlled horde is already on top of them, swarming over the human positions with no regard for their own safety. The soldiers have no choice but to defend themselves. The plaza dissolves into a chaotic melee, the crack of gunfire and the sizzle of plasma bolts mingling with the screams of the dead and dying. In the midst of the carnage, Douglas catches sight of a familiar figure standing atop a nearby tower. It's Rigel, the Eliani Emperor himself, watching the battle unfold with a cold, satisfied smile. Rage surges through Douglas like a firestorm. This is the being responsible for so much suffering, not just for humanity, but for countless other species across the galaxy. This is the monster who needs to pay for his crimes. As he fights his way through the mind-controlled mob, Douglas spots something out of the corner of his eye. One of the Ravens had been carrying a tactical nuke, a weapon of last resort. The device had been knocked loose in the crash, lying abandoned at the edge of the plaza. Douglas doesn't hesitate. He breaks from the battle, sprinting towards the nuke as fast as his armor will carry him. Plasma bolts sizzle past him, but he ignores them, his entire being focused on the weapon. He scoops up the nuke, primes the detonator and turns to face Rigel's tower. The Emperor's eyes widen as he sees what Douglas is holding. For a split second, their gazes lock across the battlefield. Then Douglas grins, a cold, merciless grin, and hurls the nuke with all his strength. The device arcs through the air, beeping ominously, and vanishes into an access hatch at the base of the tower. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then a blinding flash sears the air, followed by a deafening roar, as the tower's base explodes outward in a shower of molten metal and debris. The entire structure shudders, tilts, and then collapses in on itself like a house of cards, burying Rigel and his inner circle under thousands of tons of rubble. The shockwave from the blast slams into Douglas like a hammer blow, sending him tumbling head over heels across the plaza. His armor's systems flicker and die, the delicate electronics fried by the EMP. Around him, the mind-controlled Eliani civilians drop to the ground like marionettes with their strings cut, the control devices in their brains short-circuited by the pulse. For a moment, a stunned silence hangs over the battlefield. Then a ragged cheer goes up from the human soldiers as they realize what's just happened. They've struck a blow against the heart of the Eliani Empire, decapitating its leadership in one bold stroke. But the celebration is short-lived. In the distance, the ominous hum of engines fills the air as more Eliani ships descend towards the city, drawn by the nuclear detonation like sharks to blood in the water. The battle is far from over. If anything, the humans have just kicked the hornet's nest. The Eliani will be out for blood now, seeking revenge for their fallen emperor. Douglas hauls himself to his feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in his ribs. He scoops up a discarded Eliani plasma rifle and checks the charge, then looks around at his fellow soldiers. They're battered and bloodied, their armor scorched and dented, but there's a fierce light in their eyes. A light that says they're not done fighting, not by a long shot. "All right, people," Douglas says, his voice hard and unflinching. "We've got their attention now. Let's show these alien bastards what happens when you piss off the human race." He turns to face the oncoming ships, raising the plasma rifle to his shoulder. As the Eliani ships descend on the ruined city, Douglas rallies his battered troops. "Scavenge whatever you can," he barks. "Weapons, ammo, supplies, anything that'll help us hold out just a little longer." The soldiers fan out, raiding armories and warehouses, grabbing plasma rifles, grenades, medical kits. The engineers get to work, rigging traps in the streets and alleys. They wire buildings with explosives, turn choke points into kill zones. Snipers scale the remaining towers, setting up nests overlooking key approaches. Douglas knows it's not enough. They're outnumbered 100 to 1, facing an enemy that wants nothing more than to wipe them from existence. But surrender isn't an option. They'll fight to the last man, the last bullet. The Eliani come in a silver tide, flooding the streets with heavily armed soldiers. They're met with a wall of fire as the humans open up, plasma bolts and frag grenades tearing into their ranks. Douglas is in the thick of it, his rifle blazing as he cuts down Eliani after Eliani. His soldiers fight like demons, making the aliens pay for every inch of ground. But for every Eliani that falls, 10 more take its place. The battle rages for days, then weeks. The city is reduced to rubble, the streets choked with corpses. Inch by bloody inch, the humans are pushed back, their numbers dwindling. They make their final stand in the central plaza, the same place where this all began. The dozen survivors take up positions in the shadow of Rigel's toppled tower, preparing for the end. The Eliani come in waves, a relentless silver tide. The humans meet them with the last of their strength, plasma fire and frag grenades ripping into the alien ranks. They fight with the fury of the damned, taking scores of Eliani for every human that falls. In the end, only Douglas is left, surrounded by a mound of alien dead. His armor is shredded, his weapons spent, but still he fights, lashing out with knife and fists. The Eliani almost seem to admire his sheer refusal to die. Then a plasma bolt catches him in the chest, burning through his armor to sear the flesh beneath. He drops to his knees, blood bubbling from his lips. The Eliani step back, wary even in their moment of triumph. Douglas raises his head, locking eyes with the Eliani commander. With a last surge of strength, he activates his suit's self-destruct, a savage grin on his blood-flecked lips. If he's going to hell, he's taking these bastards with him. As the microfusion reactor goes critical, Douglas's final thoughts flash through his mind. For Earth, for the retribution, for every human these monsters slaughtered, this is for them. The explosion vaporizes everything within a 100-meter radius. Douglas at its epicenter. It leaves a crater in the heart of the Eliani capital, the city turned to a tomb. In one fell swoop, the bulk of the Eliani leadership and their finest troops are wiped out, a blow from which their empire will never recover. The shockwaves of that blast will reshape the galaxy. In the coming years, the Eliani's subject races will rise up in rebellion, the cracks in their rule laid bare by this defeat at human hands. The once mighty Eliani will be driven back, their empire crumbling until they're just one more fading power in a universe that now knows the true potential of humanity. Decades later, children on 100 worlds will learn of Douglas Johnson and the Ravens, the martyrs who sacrificed everything to break the Eliani terror. Statues will rise on every human colony, memorials to the fallen of the Retribution who showed the galaxy the price of pushing humanity too far. But mingled with the pride will be sorrow, a grief too deep for words, because this victory, like so many in war, came at a cost beyond measure. The scars left by this conflict will never truly fade, not for those who fought and bled, who lost homes and loved ones, and any chance at a normal life. Humanity has won its place among the stars, but the price it paid can never be recouped. And that in the end is the true tragedy of war, not the banners or the bugles or the battle cries, but the empty seats at tables, the dogs that will never greet their masters again, the futures that now will never be. There are no winners in war, the saying goes, only survivors and those left to carry the memory of the lost. The smoke from Douglas's final sacrifice still hangs heavy in the air as the surviving human soldiers pick their way through the ruins of the Eliani capital. Captain Alice Novak, her face streaked with grime and blood, leads the ragged band, her eyes hard and determined. "Scavenge anything you can," she orders, her voice hoarse from shouting over the din of battle. "Weapons, supplies, ship parts. We need to get off this rock before more Eliani show up." The soldiers spread out, combing through the wreckage of Eliani ships and buildings. They work with grim efficiency, stripping components and materials, trying to cobble together a vessel capable of interstellar flight. But as they work, a new threat emerges from the shadows. A faction of Eliani extremists, even more radical and ruthless than the empire they once served, begins a guerrilla campaign against the humans. Led by the brilliant and charismatic Zoltar, They strike without warning, fading away before the humans can mount a response. They blame us for the fall of their empire, Novak says grimly as she surveys the latest attack site, the bodies of her soldiers strewn across the rubble. Zoltar has vowed to hunt down and exterminate every last human, starting with us. The extremists grow bolder with each passing day. In a series of daring raids, they manage to steal critical components for the humans' escape ship, leaving them stranded and vulnerable. The human ranks are thinned by constant attrition, each soldier lost irreplaceable. Backed into a corner, Novak hatches a desperate plan. She will allow herself and a small team to be captured by Zoltar, taken to his hidden base. Once there, they will send a signal to guide the rest of the humans to the extremists' stronghold. It's a sacrifice play, she tells her soldiers, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. But it's our only chance. We'll buy the rest of you the time you need to finish the ship and get out of here. The plan works, but at a horrific cost. Novak and her team are subjected to unimaginable torture at the hands of Zoltar and his sadists. Several break under the strain, revealing the location of the human base. In the extremists' stronghold, Novak lies strapped to a blood-soaked table, her body broken, her mind teetering on the edge of oblivion. Zoltar looms over her, his eyes alight with malice. "Your species is a cancer," he hisses, his blade tracing the contours of her face, a blight that must be purged from the galaxy, and I will take great pleasure in being the one to do it. Despite the agony, despite the fear, Novak meets his gaze unflinchingly. With a last surge of strength, she activates the signaling device embedded in her tooth. Miles away in the wreckage of the human base, a light begins to blink on a cobbled-together console. The humans have received Novak's signal, and they know what they must do. They arm themselves with every weapon they have left, every scrap of ordnance and explosives. It's not much, but it will have to be enough. They pile into their ramshackle vehicles and set out, ready to face their fate. At the extremist base, Zoltar is preparing for his final assault on the humans. His soldiers are mustering, his weapons primed. He can taste victory, sweet and close. But the humans strike first, an all-out attack with everything they have. The battle is apocalyptic, a maelstrom of fire and blood and destruction. The human soldiers fight with the desperate strength of the doomed, the extremists with the fervor of fanatics. Novak, barely clinging to life in her cell, hears the sounds of battle raging outside. She knows her comrades have come for her, knows they are buying her a chance, however slim, at survival. With a grunt of pain, she wrenches her broken body free of her restraints. She staggers to the door, every step an agony, leaving a trail of blood behind her. She emerges into a scene of utter chaos, human and Eleani locked in a brutal melee. She spots Zoltar across the battlefield, directing his troops. Gritting her teeth, she begins to limp towards him, her hand tight around the hilt of a stolen knife. The battle rages around them as Novak and Zoltar clash, human and Eleani, broken soldier and ruthless tyrant. They fight with a savagery born of desperation, each knowing only one will walk away. In the end, it is Novak who stands victorious over Zoltar's broken body, her knife buried to the hilt in his chest. But her triumph is short-lived as she collapses, her injuries too severe, her strength spent. Around her the battle reaches its crescendo. The human soldiers, armed with the last dregs of their nuclear arsenal, unleash hell upon the extremist base. The ensuing conflagration is like the birth of a new sun, a searing white light that consumes everything in its path. When the smoke clears, the humans are victorious, but the cost is staggering. More than half their number lie dead and the rest are badly wounded. Novak herself is barely alive, her body shattered, her mind haunted by the horrors she has endured. The survivors stagger back to their base, where they finally manage to cobble together a working ship. They leave the Eleani homeworld behind, a blasted, radioactive wasteland, and set out into the stars, their destination the distant human colonies established in the years since the fall of Earth, The journey is long and arduous, and not all will survive. Many succumb to their injuries while others take their own lives, unable to bear the weight of their trauma. In the end, only a handful reach the colonies, broken in body and spirit, but alive. They bring with them a tale of sacrifice and courage, of the Retribution and the Ravens, of Douglas Johnson and Alice Novak, and all the heroes who fought and died so that humanity might live. It is a story that will be told and retold down through the generations, a legend of the indomitable human spirit. But for those few survivors, those who endured the horrors and lived to carry the tale, the story is a burden as much as an inspiration. They are the ones who will wake screaming in the night, who will bear the scars, seen and unseen, for the rest of their days. For them, the war will never really end. Such is the price of being the ones left to remember. Such is the cost of survival in a hostile universe. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.